I would have signed without understanding Japanese, until the gardener's son took control. Robert Miller had the pen in his hand, ready to sign the papers that would save his company from complete ruin. 3 generations of the family had built that furniture factory in Grand Rapids, and now everything depended on his signature, on those documents written in characters he couldn't decipher. The 8-year-old boy appeared at the meeting room door, just as Robert raised the pen. Mason, the son of James, the gardener who had tended the office plants for 20 years, stood there with wide, worried eyes. "Mr. Robert, you can't sign that," the child said, his voice firm despite his young age. Secretary Margaret immediately stood to usher the boy out, but Robert motioned for her to stop. There was something urgent in Mason's voice that made him hesitate. "Mason, what are you doing here? Where's your father?" Robert asked, lowering the pen. The Japanese executive across the table, Mr. Nakamura, smiled politely, but his eyes flashed with irritation. Beside him, the American translator, Dr. Stevens, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "My father's watering the plants downstairs, but I came to warn you. These papers aren't what they said they are." Mason stepped closer to the table, pointing to a specific section of the document. Robert stared at the Japanese characters, understanding nothing. For 3 months, he had negotiated with Mr. Nakamura through Dr. Stevens. The proposal was simple. The Japanese company Cherry Blossom Corporation would invest $15 million in the furniture factory in exchange for 49% of the shares. It would be the salvation for the debts accumulated during the pandemic and the crisis that followed. "Mason, how could you know what's written there?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. "My great-grandmother Yumiko taught me Japanese before she passed 2 years ago. She always said I should learn to honor our family." Mason replied with a seriousness beyond his years. Dr. Stevens abruptly stood from his chair. "Mr. Miller, this is ridiculous. A child can't interfere with serious business. We're wasting precious time." Mr. Nakamura remained silent, but Robert noticed his hands were slightly trembling. Something was wrong here. "What kind of problem do you see in these papers, Mason?" Robert decided to listen. The boy climbed onto a chair to reach the table's height and began pointing to different parts of the document. "Here it says you're giving 70% of the company, not 49%. And here," he flipped the page, "it says all employees with over 10 years will be let go in 6 months. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Robert felt the blood drain from his face. James, Mason's father, would be one of the first to be fired under this interpretation. "Dr. Stevens, is this true?" Robert turned to the translator. "Absolute nonsense. A child doesn't understand the technical terms of a business contract. There are nuances that—" Dr. Stevens spoke quickly, visibly sweating. "Then translate it line by line in front of him," Robert interrupted, crossing his arms. Mr. Nakamura finally spoke in English. "Mr. Miller, we have a schedule to maintain, many important meetings today." Mason looked directly at Mr. Nakamura and replied in fluent Japanese. Robert didn't understand the words, but he saw the Japanese executive's face completely transform, shifting from politeness to something close to panic. "What did you say to him?" Robert asked Mason. "I asked if he really thought it was right to deceive an honest man who's just trying to save so many families' jobs," Mason answered, without taking his eyes off Mr. Nakamura. Dr. Stevens began hurriedly gathering the papers. "Gentlemen, I think it's best we reschedule this meeting. I need to review some points in the contract." "No," Robert said firmly. "No one leaves this room until I understand exactly what's written in these documents. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now, continuing. For the next 20 minutes, Mason translated each paragraph of the contract. What emerged was a terrifying picture of how Robert was about to lose not only his company, but also leave dozens of families without their livelihoods. The actual contract stated that Cherry Blossom Corporation would take full control of operations in 8 months. All long-time employees would be replaced by outsourced workers, and the Miller family's century-old brand would be erased. "Why did you do this?" Robert asked, his voice trembling with restrained anger. Mr. Nakamura replied in Japanese, and Mason translated. He said it's just business, that struggling companies are opportunities for those with vision. And you, Dr. Stevens? Robert turned to the translator. How much did they pay you to betray me? Dr. Stevens didn't answer, but Mr. Nakamura opened a folder and showed a spreadsheet. Mason glanced at it and said, "These are names of other American companies. It looks like they've done this before." Robert took the spreadsheet. Even without understanding the Japanese characters, he recognized some names of companies that had been sold to foreign groups in recent years. All had gone through similar processes: financial struggles, a rescue offer, and then the gradual disappearance of the founders and longtime employees. "How many families have you destroyed with this scheme?" Robert asked. Mr. Nakamura stood abruptly and said something in Japanese that made Mason step back. "What did he say?" Robert asked, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. He said a mixed child shouldn't meddle in the affairs of pure Japanese adults," Mason replied, tears in his eyes. The anger that seized Robert was unlike anything he'd ever felt. It wasn't just about the fraudulent contract. It was about the disrespect toward this brave boy who had saved everything he loved. "Get out of my company, now," Robert said, pointing to the door. Dr. Stevens and Mr. Nakamura left quickly, but not before Mr. Nakamura muttered something threatening. "What did he say now?" Robert asked. "That this isn't over, that they'll find a way to get what they want," Mason answered, wiping his eyes. When they were alone in the room, Robert knelt in front of Mason. "You saved our company, son. You saved your father's job and everyone else's here. My great-grandmother always said language is a powerful tool, that it can build bridges or tear down walls. She made me promise I'd always use Japanese to help, never to hurt," Mason said, with wisdom beyond his 8 years. Robert hugged the boy, feeling a mix of gratitude and despair. He'd escaped a trap, but he still faced the same financial troubles that had led him to consider the offer in the first place. In the days that followed, Robert discovered his situation was even worse than he'd imagined. Mr. Nakamura had spread rumors in the market about instability in his company. Clients began canceling orders, and suppliers started demanding upfront payments. It was as if a coordinated campaign was underway to force him into bankruptcy. James, the gardener, approached Robert one morning with a worried expression. "Mr. Robert, I need to tell you something. Yesterday, when I was walking home with Mason, a car followed us almost all the way to our street." "Are you sure?" Robert asked, feeling a chill in his stomach. "Mason noticed it too. He said he saw the driver taking pictures of our house." James continued. "Sir, I'm starting to get scared." Robert ran his hand through his hair, feeling the weight of responsibility. Not only was his company at risk, but now the safety of James and Mason was also threatened because of his decision not to sign the contract. That afternoon, Margaret, the secretary, knocked on his office door with a tense expression. "Mr. Robert, a summons arrived. They're demanding immediate payment of all the company's debts." Robert took the document with trembling hands. The lawyer representing the creditors was the same Dr. Stevens who had tried to deceive him with the Japanese contract. Everything was connected. They had planned not only to steal his company, but to ensure he had no choice but to accept. "How much time do we have?" Robert asked. 15 days to pay everything, or the company goes to auction," Margaret replied, her voice choked. 15 days to find $15 million. It was impossible. Robert sank heavily into his chair, looking out the window at the garden where Mason played while his father worked. That boy had saved the company from being stolen, but now it would be lost anyway. That night, Robert was in his office late, trying to find a solution, when he heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Mason, carrying 2 glasses of juice. "My mother sent this for you. She said it's not good to work hungry," the boy said, offering one of the glasses. "Mason, you should be asleep," Robert said, but accepted the juice gratefully. "I can't sleep knowing you're worried. My father told me about the papers that came today." Mason sat in the chair across from the desk. "You'll figure it out, won't you?" Robert looked into those confident eyes and felt his heart tighten. How could he explain to a child that sometimes adults get into trouble they can't fix? "I'm trying, Mason, but sometimes things are more complicated than we'd like," Robert answered honestly. "My great-grandmother always said that when a problem seems impossible, it's because we're only looking at it from one angle. She said we need to turn it around until we find the side that shows the solution," Mason said, taking a sip of juice. "Your great-grandmother was very wise," Robert remarked. "She knew a lot of things. She came from Japan when she was young, worked hard to build a life here. She always told stories about how the Japanese community helped each other in tough times." Mason paused, as if remembering something important. "Mr. Robert, what if we reached out to the Japanese community here? Maybe they can help us figure out who this Mr. Nakamura really is." The boy's suggestion made Robert lift his head. He had never thought of that. New York City had one of the largest Japanese communities outside Japan. Maybe someone knew the Cherry Blossom Corporation or could help uncover what was really going on. "Mason, you're a genius," Robert said, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in days. The next day, Robert and Mason went to Chinatown. Robert had never spent much time there, but Mason knew the way perfectly. He led Robert straight to a small Japanese goods store, where an elderly woman greeted them with a warm smile. "Mrs. Kazuko, this is the lady my great-grandmother talked about," Mason said in Japanese, then translated for Robert. "She asked if we could talk about something important." Mrs. Kazuko invited them to have tea in the back of the store. When Robert explained the situation, the woman's expression changed completely. "Mr. Nakamura," she said, shaking her head. "I know that name. He doesn't represent any reputable company in Japan." "What do you mean?" Robert asked. Mrs. Kazuko spoke in Japanese with Mason, who translated. "She says Mr. Nakamura is known here in the community. He's tried to scam others before, always with the same investment story. The real Cherry Blossom Corporation doesn't even know he's using their name." Robert felt a mix of relief and anger. So it was all a lie from the beginning? "She's calling Mr. Kato, who's important in the Japanese association here. He'll want to talk to us," Mason continued, translating. An hour later, Robert was sitting in a room full of businessmen from the Japanese community. Mr. Kato, a man in his 70s with a commanding presence, listened carefully as Mason translated the whole story. When Mason finished explaining the details of the fraudulent contract, Mr. Kato asked several questions in Japanese. With each answer, the expressions in the room grew more serious. "What are they saying?" Robert asked. "Mr. Kato says this is a disgrace to the Japanese community, that men like Mr. Nakamura tarnish the reputation of all the honest Japanese living in the United States," Mason translated. "They want to help you resolve this." "But how? I have 15 million in debt and only 11 days to pay," Robert explained. Mr. Kato spoke at length with the others present, then turned to Mason in Japanese. "He wants to know if you'd be willing to accept a real investment with a fair and transparent contract. They know your company's reputation and believe you're an honest man," Mason translated, his eyes shining with hope. Robert could hardly believe what he was hearing. "They do that even without knowing me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, continuing, the answer came through Mr. Kato, who explained that the Japanese community had an investment fund specifically to help struggling American family businesses. It was their way of repaying the hospitality they'd received when they first arrived in the United States decades ago. "But they want to see the company first," Mason translated, "and they want me to be the official translator for all meetings." Robert laughed for the first time in weeks. "Mason, I think you just landed your first job." Over the next 3 days, a delegation from the Japanese community visited the furniture factory. Robert was nervous at first, but he soon realized they were genuinely interested in understanding the business and meeting the employees. James was even more nervous than Robert. When the visitors arrived at the garden, he introduced himself shyly, apologizing for Mason's not-so-perfect English in Japanese. One of the visitors, Mr. Ishikawa, spoke at length with James in Japanese. Robert asked Mason to translate. Mr. Ishikawa says Mason speaks Japanese better than many young Japanese people he knows. that it's rare to see someone so young master the formal aspects of the language, Mason translated, blushing with pride. And he's asking my dad about our family, about my great-grandmother, Mason continued. Dad's telling him she came alone from Japan in 1960, worked in several homes, saved money to bring the rest of the family over. Mr. Ishikawa stopped speaking and stared intently at James. Then he said something that left both James and Mason stunned. "What happened?" Robert asked, concerned. "Mr. Ishikawa knew my great-grandmother," Mason said, tears in his eyes. "They came on the same ship. He says she was the bravest woman he'd ever met." From that moment on, the atmosphere changed completely. It was no longer just a business visit, but a reunion of family histories. Mr. Ishikawa shared that he had also lost touch with many people from the time they first arrived, and was deeply moved to learn about the legacy Yumiko had left behind. "Your great-grandmother taught me English when we arrived," Mr. Ishikawa said directly to Mason in careful but clear English. "She used to say that language is a bridge between hearts." At the end of the visit, Mr. Kato met with Robert privately. "Mr. Miller, our decision is made. We will invest in your company." "I don't know how to thank you," Robert replied, still processing that his company was saved. "No need to thank us. We should be thanking Mason. Without him, Mr. Nakamura would have succeeded once again in deceiving an honest family," Mr. Kato answered. "And we've also decided we want to do more than just invest." "What do you mean?" Robert asked. "We want to create a program to protect other businesses from this kind of fraud. Mason will be our special consultant." Mr. Kato smiled. At just 8 years old, he's already proven to be sharper than many adults. When Robert shared the news with Mason, the boy fell silent for a long moment. "Does this mean I'll be able to help others like I helped you?" Mason finally asked. "That's exactly what it means," Robert replied. "Then my great-grandmother would be proud," Mason said, his smile lighting up his entire face. In the following days, lawyers from the Japanese community worked to draft a completely transparent contract. Every clause was explained to Robert in English and then reviewed by Mason in Japanese. There was no room for misunderstandings or traps. The investment would be $20 million in exchange for 30% of the company, with guarantees that all employees would be retained and that the Miller family would maintain full control of operations. It was far better than any offer Robert had received before. "Why are you being so generous?" Robert asked Mr. Kato on the day of the signing. "Because Mason reminded us of what truly matters. It's not just about money. It's about preserving families and traditions. Your company represents 3 generations of honest work. That's worth more than any profit," Mr. Kato replied. The day of the contract signing was a celebration. Robert insisted that James and Mason be present as special guests. When it was time to sign, Robert asked Mason to read each page aloud, both in Japanese and English. "Now I'm certain I'm signing exactly what should be signed," Robert said, drawing laughter from everyone present. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, the FBI approached Robert with questions about Mr. Nakamura and Dr. Stevens. Other business owners had filed similar complaints, and authorities were building a case against the pair. Mason was called to testify, accompanied by a lawyer appointed by the Japanese investors. The boy translated documents uncovered in the investigation, helping prove that the scheme had harmed at least 12 businesses over the past 5 years. "Mason is becoming famous," James remarked to Robert, showing him a local newspaper article about the boy who exposed a $1 million fraud. "He deserves all the recognition," Robert replied, "but I hope it doesn't go to his head." It didn't. Mason remained the same playful and curious boy he'd always been, but now with an added responsibility. The Japanese community invited him to give talks at schools about the importance of learning languages and preserving family traditions. Mason's first talk was at his own school. Robert attended, along with James and several employees from the company. Seeing that 8-year-old boy speaking confidently to an audience of adults about intercultural respect and honesty in business was one of the most moving moments in Robert's life. "My great-grandmother always said that when we learn someone's language, we learn to respect their heart," Mason said during the talk. That's why it's important not to use that knowledge to harm, but always to help. After the lecture, a girl from Mason's class raised her hand. "Mason, aren't you scared of dealing with important grown-ups?" "I am," Mason answered honestly. "But my great-grandmother taught me that doing the right thing sometimes scares you, but doing the wrong thing always brings regret." 3 months after signing the contract, Robert's company was thriving again. Orders returned, new employees were hired, and the family's century-old brand was preserved. But the most important change was in the company culture itself. Robert instituted a policy of total transparency. Every important document had to be translated and verified by at least 2 independent people. Mason became the official consultant for any negotiation involving foreign language documents. "It's a bit unusual to have an 8-year-old as a consultant," remarked Margaret, the secretary, organizing a new folder with translated documents. "Unusual but effective," Robert replied. "Mason has already caught 2 problematic contracts this month alone." It was true. Robert's reputation as a careful businessman had spread, but it also attracted more attempts at fraud. Fortunately, he now had Mason and the Japanese community as vigilant partners. James had also been promoted. He was no longer just a gardener, but the general maintenance supervisor and responsible for cultural integration between American employees and the new Japanese consultants who regularly visited the company. "I never thought my job could be so important," James confessed to Robert during one of their weekly meetings. "Before, I just took care of the plants." "James, you've always taken care of much more than plants. You raised Mason to be the incredible person he is. That's what really saved our company," Robert replied. The most remarkable transformation, however, was in Mason. Though he was still a normal child most of the time, he had developed impressive maturity and confidence when it came to business and translation matters. Mr. Cato visited the company every 2 weeks to monitor the progress of investments. He always made a point of talking to Mason about his progress in Japanese and the cases he was helping to resolve. "Mason, have you thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" Mr. Cato asked during one visit. "I want to be a bridge," Mason answered without hesitation. "A bridge?" Mr. Cato smiled curiously. "My great-grandmother always said languages are bridges between people. I want to build bridges so people from different places can understand and help each other," Mason explained. "You're already doing that," Mr. Cato said, pride evident in his voice. 6 months after the incident with Mr. Nakamura, Robert received an unexpected offer. A Japanese university wanted to fund Mason's studies in Japan when he turned 15, so he could become an expert in US-Japan trade relations. Robert called James and Mason to discuss the proposal in his office. "It's an incredible opportunity," Robert said, "but the decision has to be yours." James looked at his son with a mix of pride and worry. "Mason, what do you think?" "It's a long time away from home," Mason said thoughtfully, "but it's also a chance to learn more so I can help more people." "You don't have to decide now," Robert said. "You have a few years to think about it." "Can I ask a question?" Mason said. "If I go to Japan, do you promise you'll keep taking good care of the company and the employees?" Robert felt his eyes filling with tears. "I promise, Mason, and I promise that when you come back, there will always be a place for you here." "Then it's settled. I'll study in Japan to become the best bridge I can be," Mason said, with that same determination that had once saved the company. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. A year after the incident that nearly cost him his company, Robert organized a special celebration. It was Mason's 9th birthday, but also the first anniversary of their partnership with the Japanese community. The party took place in the company's garden, among the plants James tended to with such care. Everyone was there, the employees, the families of the Japanese investors, and many others Mason had helped over the past year. "I'd like to make a toast," Robert said, raising his glass of juice. "A year ago, I almost lost everything my family built over 3 generations. Today, our company is stronger than ever, not just financially, but morally." Everyone raised their glasses, but Robert continued. "This was only possible because of an 8-year-old boy who had the courage to say something was wrong. Mason taught us that age doesn't matter when it comes to doing what's right. And that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places, added Mr. Cato. And that family isn't just about sharing the same blood, but about caring for one another, James said, moved. When it was Mason's turn to speak, he stood on his chair to reach the adult's height. My great-grandmother always said life is like a garden. Sometimes weeds try to harm the good plants, but if we take care of each other, the good plants will always grow stronger, Mason said, looking at the plants around him. Thank you for letting me be part of this garden. Not a single eye at the party stayed dry. Robert realized Mason had grown far beyond his 9 years, yet he still held on to the purity and wisdom that made him special. After the party, when everyone had left, Robert stayed in the garden with James and Mason, watching the plants under the soft evening light. James, can I ask you a personal question? Robert said. Of course, Mr. Robert. How did you and your wife raise Mason to be so extraordinary? Robert asked, genuinely curious. James smiled, watching his son play among the flowers. We didn't do anything special. We just tried to teach him to listen more than he speaks, to give more than he asks for, and never to use what he knows to hurt others. And his great-grandmother's influence was key, James continued. Yumiko spent the last years of her life telling Mason stories, teaching him Japanese, but most of all, passing down values. She always said, true wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we can give to others. Robert nodded, understanding better where Mason's wisdom came from. She left an incredible legacy. The most beautiful part is that Mason doesn't even realize how special he is, James said. To him, helping others is as natural as breathing. 2 years passed, and Robert's company became a model of intercultural partnership. The story of how an 8-year-old boy saved a company from fraud had spread, and they received visits from business owners and students eager to learn about their unique collaboration. Mason, now 11, had become something of a local celebrity. He regularly spoke at events about ethical entrepreneurship and intercultural relations, but his favorite activity remained working in the garden with his father and helping Robert with translations. Mason is changing how people see international business, Margaret remarked during one of their weekly meetings. Yesterday, I got 3 calls from businessmen asking for his consulting. And did he accept? Robert asked. He said he needs to finish his homework first, Margaret laughed. Some things never change. It was true. No matter how mature Mason was in business matters, he was still a normal kid at home. He played soccer with his friends, watched cartoons, and sometimes still needed reminders to clean his room. But there were moments when his early wisdom even surprised Robert, like the time a new investor showed up with a proposal to expand the company to other states. What do you think, Mason? Robert asked, showing him the documents. Mason read carefully and then asked, Mr. Robert, why does this man want to invest so much in our company? He says he sees growth potential, Robert replied, but we're growing fine at our current pace, and he wants to expand way too fast, Mason observed. My great-grandmother always said that when someone tries to make you run without properly explaining why, it's better to stop and think. Robert reread the proposal more carefully and realized Mason was right. The expansion plan was too aggressive and could risk the stability they'd worked hard to achieve. You're right, Mason. We'll decline the offer, Robert said. Aren't you disappointed? Mason asked. It was a lot of money. Mason, you taught me that not all money is worth it. Sometimes it's better to grow slowly and keep what's important, Robert replied. Mr. Cato, who had been listening, smiled approvingly. Mason, you're learning one of the most important business lessons, knowing when to say no. The relationship between Mason and Mr. Cato had grown into a true cross-generational partnership. The Japanese businessman had become like a grandfather figure to Mason, sharing not just business knowledge, but also Japanese culture and the importance of keeping traditions. Mr. Cato, can I ask you something? Mason said during one of their conversations. Always, Mason-kun. Why did you and the others decide to help Mr. Robert's company? You didn't even know us, Mason asked. Mr. Cato thought for a moment before answering. You know, Mason, when we first came to the United States, many people helped us without knowing us. Americans gave us work, taught us English, welcomed us like family. Now it's our turn to give back. But you've already given back so much, Mason pointed out. One can never give back too much kindness, Mr. Cato said, and you gave us the chance to do something truly meaningful, not just save a company, but strengthen the friendship between our peoples. Mason nodded, absorbing the lesson. Is that why I want to keep being a bridge? Exactly. Bridges connect people, and connected people can do amazing things, Mr. Cato replied. That same year, Mason received a special invitation. The Japanese embassy in the United States wanted to honor him for his contributions to relations between the two countries. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C., with the ambassador and other officials in attendance. It'll be different from the talks you've given before, Robert explained. There'll be protocol, formality. Do I have to wear a suit? Mason asked, making a face that made everyone laugh. Yes, you do, James answered, but it'll be very special. You'll represent not just our company, but our whole community. The trip to Washington, D.C. was Mason's first time leaving New York City. Robert, James, and Mr. Cato accompanied him. During the flight, Mason spent his time studying a speech he had prepared in Japanese and English. Nervous? Robert asked. A little, Mason admitted. It's a big responsibility to represent so many people. You'll do just fine, Mr. Cato assured him. Just be yourself. The ceremony at the Japanese embassy was even more formal than Mason had imagined. There were journalists, diplomats, business people, and representatives from various Japanese-American organizations. Mason, in his first formal suit, looked small among all those important adults. But when it was his turn to speak, all his nervousness disappeared. Mason addressed the audience first in English, then in Japanese, telling the story of how his great-grandmother Yumiko had inspired him to use knowledge to help others. My great-grandmother Yumiko taught me that differences between people aren't obstacles, they're opportunities. When we respect and learn from one another, we all grow richer, Mason said with a confidence that even impressed Robert. That's why I keep studying Japanese, to be a bridge between the United States and Japan, so other families won't be deceived by dishonest people, and so honest business people from both countries can work together, Mason continued. When he finished, the audience rose in applause. The ambassador presented Mason with a special recognition medal, and several journalists requested interviews. How does it feel to be so young and already so recognized? One reporter asked. I feel like I have a lot of responsibility, but also a lot of luck, Mason replied. Luck to have a family that supports me, friends who teach me, and opportunities to help people. And what are your plans for the future? Another journalist asked. To keep studying, keep helping, and maybe one day go to Japan to learn even more so I can help even better, Mason answered. Back in New York City, life returned to normal, but with some significant changes. Mason began receiving invitations to speak in other cities, and Robert always made sure to accompany him, along with James. It's turning into a little tour, Margaret joked, organizing Mason's travel schedule. As long as it doesn't interfere with his studies, James said, always concerned about balancing Mason's special activities with his normal childhood. And as long as he still has time to play, Robert added, I don't want Mason to lose his childhood because of adult responsibilities. It was a valid concern. Mason had become a public figure, but he was still an 11-year-old boy. Fortunately, he knew how to set boundaries. Mr. Robert, can I tell you something? Mason said one day, after declining a speaking invitation. Of course, Mason. Sometimes I feel like people expect me to always have answers for everything, but I'm still learning, I'm still a kid, Mason said with touching honesty. Mason, that's exactly why you're so special. You know you don't know everything, and that's real wisdom, Robert replied. It's good to know I can say I don't know sometimes, Mason smiled, visibly relieved. You always can, and you can always talk to me, your dad, or Mr. Cato if you have doubts or feel pressured, Robert assured him. 3 years had passed since the day Mason saved the company. Now 12, he was a constant presence not just in translations, but in many of the company's important decisions. His unique perspective, part curious child, part wise young man, had become invaluable. The company had grown steadily and sustainably. New Japanese partners had joined the original investment, always with transparent contracts and careful translations. Robert had become a reference in ethical international partnerships. James had also grown professionally. He now coordinated not only the company's maintenance, but also a cultural exchange program that welcomed young Japanese individuals interested in learning about business in the United States. "Dad, are you happy with all these changes?" Mason asked one day while they worked together in the garden. "Very happy," James replied. "But you know what makes me happiest?" "What?" "Seeing that even with all this importance, you're still my boy who loves digging in the dirt and talking to the plants," James said, hugging his son. "Plants understand better than a lot of people," Mason laughed. "They aren't impressed by medals or interviews. They just want water, sun, and care." "Just like people deep down," James observed. "Everyone wants to be cared for and respected." It was this simplicity in how he viewed life that made Mason so special. No matter how much recognition he received, he never lost sight of what truly mattered: human relationships and mutual care. One day, Robert received a call that would change everything again. It was from the Japanese university that had offered Mason the scholarship. They wanted to move the proposal forward. "Move it forward how?" Robert asked the professor who called. "We'd like Mason to come spend 6 months with us next year as a pilot program. He'd have special tutors and could experience Japan before making a final decision about studying here when he's older," the professor explained. Robert felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, it was an incredible opportunity for Mason. On the other, 6 months was a long time for a child to be away from family. When he shared the proposal with James and Mason, their reactions were interesting. James looked visibly worried, but Mason seemed thoughtful. "Mason, what do you think?" Robert asked. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Mason replied. "It's a very big decision." For a week, Mason spoke with several people. He talked to Mr. Cato, who encouraged him to accept. He spoke with Margaret, who said the company would miss him but would support his decision. He talked to his school friends, who were torn between excitement and sadness at the thought of him leaving. But the most important conversation was with his father one evening in the company garden. "Dad, are you afraid of me going?" Mason asked. "I am," James admitted. "You're still my boy. 6 months feels like forever." "For me too," Mason said. "But I've been thinking, my great-grandmother left Japan alone when she was only 20. She must have been so scared." "She definitely was," James agreed. "But she was brave, and because of her courage, I'm here today, able to help people," Mason continued. "Maybe it's my turn to be brave too." James hugged his son, feeling equal parts pride and worry. "If you decide to go, I'll support you. But if you decide to stay, I'll support you too." "Thank you, Dad, for always letting me choose," Mason said. At the end of the week, Mason called Robert and Mr. Cato for a formal meeting in the office. He sat in the big chair, adopting a serious posture. "I've decided to accept the offer," Mason announced, "but with a few conditions." "What conditions?" Robert asked, curious. "First, I want to keep working for our company from there. I can do translations and consulting by video call," Mason said. "Second, I want monthly reports on the garden so I know how the plants are doing. Third, if I don't adjust, I want to be able to come back before the 6 months are up." "And fourth?" Mr. Cato asked, sensing Mason had more to say. "Fourth, when I come back, I want to organize an exchange program so other American kids can experience Japan too." "So it's not just me having this opportunity," Mason said. Robert and Mr. Cato exchanged impressed glances. Even at 12 years old, Mason was thinking about how to use his opportunities to help others. "All conditions are accepted," Mr. Cato said solemnly. "In fact, I'm impressed by your maturity." "I learned from you," Mason replied simply. The months leading up to Mason's trip were intense. He needed to prepare academically but also emotionally. Robert organized a farewell party at the company with all the employees and partners. "Mason will take a little piece of all of us to Japan," Robert said during his speech at the party. "And when he returns, he'll bring a little piece of Japan back to enrich our community. I just hope I don't forget English," Mason joked, making everyone laugh. Impossible, said Mr. Kato, deliberately mixing English and Japanese. You have very strong roots here. The night before the trip, Mason slept at Robert's house, a tradition they had created for special occasions. They stayed up late, talking about what Mason might encounter in Japan. It'll be different from everything you know, Robert said, but you've already proven you adapt well to new situations. I'm nervous but also excited, Mason admitted. I feel like I'm following the path my great-grandmother wanted me to take. She would be very proud, Robert assured him. On the day of departure, half the company went to the airport to say goodbye to Mason. James was clearly emotional, trying to stay strong for his son. Robert also fought back tears. Take care of the company for me, Mason said, hugging Robert, and take care of my dad. And you take care of yourself, Robert replied. Remember, you'll always have a family here waiting for your return. When Mason boarded the plane, his luggage carried not just clothes and books, but also a small pot with a cutting from one of the plants in the company garden. It was his way of taking a piece of home to the other side of the world. The end. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of courage and wisdom? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most, and if you know someone like Mason in your life. Your likes and subscriptions to the channel inspire us to keep sharing stories that touch the heart.